All right, lesson six, intro to programming. Just to get us started, remember that our last lesson we learned that we need to create a new kind of language, a programming language, in order to clearly communicate our instructions to a computer. So we're going to go ahead and move straight to Code Studio today, starting with Bubble 2. And what you'll notice about Code Studio is that at the top, you're going to learn all the instructions of what you need to complete in order for it to let you move to the next bubble. So you're going to do the do this part, run this program, see what it does. You're going to discuss if you have a partner that you can run through this with. That would be great. And you can discuss the information there. Why do you think some information is in quotes and some is not? And then if you have time, or if you want to go back later when you have time to actually modify the program, that's great practice. But for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to go through that part with you. So a couple of things that you can change in App Lab. Note that you can somewhat move the things around, take the instructions off, move the toolbox over. You can switch to text mode, although I would highly recommend that you stay in blocks mode for the entirety of Unit 3 until you get a good handle on coding. What you can do with blocks is you can drag them over here. Oops, drag them over here, and they're going to include all the things that they need to include: periods, parentheses, semicolons, and you're not going to accidentally forget something that's going to give you an error. If you decide you don't want them, you just drag them back off of your workspace and they're no longer there. If you think you broke something, you delete something accidentally that was supposed to be there, go to version history and you can look at the previously saved versions. It automatically saves every now and again, or you can go back to start over completely and it will just clear everything back to the original. Also, as you're running the code, here you can determine how fast the code is running or how slow the code is running. So that's one thing that it's helpful to slow down the code if you want to, for example, watch the lines highlight as they're going through and kind of see where an error might be occurring. But if you just want to make sure that the end result happens, go faster. Okay, so hopefully with this bubble, you learned that strings go in quotes. Those are usually text. Usually, if you want some text to print, it has to be in quotes, and that's called a string. A number, however, reacts differently. It acts differently in code, and it does not have to be in quotes. Moving to bubble three, again, do this part. This one is telling you all of it is do this. So run the program, see how it works, and you need to click the run button. Duh. Okay, but then you also need to click or nope, don't have to click it. I just mouse over it. Nope, nothing. Okay, duh. So in my programming, I can run that and see what's happening. I have a console log statement show up first, then the button sets a new background color to blue. And then the big button sets the height to 200 and the big button sets the text. Now it's a bigger button. And then finally, the console log statement ending my program appears down here in what we call the console log. So the differences between console log and set property are that a console log only shows up in the console log and not on your screen, and the set property changes an element on your screen but doesn't have anything to do with the console log. Another difference is that the console log only requires one input. You're telling it, this is the string that I want to print in the console log. A set property requires three different inputs. You have to tell it what element do you want to change? What do you want to change about that element? And then what specifically are you going to change it to? You'll also notice over here in your toolbox, you have different drawers. This is your UI control, meaning user interface controls. Here's your variables drawer and your functions drawer. And as we move forward, you'll get more and more things in those drawers. But we're trying to keep it as simple as possible as we're learning. If you mouse over something like this set property, you'll see that blue box appear that's going to tell you kind of what that command does and what information is going to be required to input. Moving on to bubble four, run the program, see how it works. Make sure you click the button on the screen and look at the code, discuss how does the on event block work. So here is an on event block. It is, we call that an event handler. Okay. So it handles all kinds of code inside of it. When you click the big button, the following code runs. So one thing you should notice is that when you hit run, anything outside of the on event handler is going to run in sequential order. This console log statement is going to run. It's going to skip everything in the on event handler, and then it's going to run the next console log statement. It is only ever going to run the on event handler information if you click the big button. You can also change the information here on event, and you're talking about usually an element that is on your screen, and all we have is the screen itself and the big button. And what do I want the user to do to that element? And I have lots of choices there. You can play around with those and see what they do and what might work for different situations. Next, bubble 5, you're going to run the program, see how it works, make sure you click both buttons. So looking at the play sound block, which is this right here, this one right here. So you probably noticed that that's going to play a sound that comes from the library. And you locate that library by clicking the drop down and saying choose. And then it's going to give you all the choices that there currently are in Code Studio. And what's different about the lines that start with two forward slashes, these gray ones? Now, those are just comment blocks, so they're not code. Nothing happens to the program at all. If you had a program that just had all comments, nothing, literally nothing would happen. They're there for you to remember what's going on with this piece of code, how it works, or why I created it. Or if you were to share your code with somebody else, it's going to help them to understand what that code does. And finally, bubble 6, you're going to run this program and see what it does, discuss, and come back. And we're talking about the random number. How does the random number command work? Well, it chooses a new random number every time that line of code runs between the high and low value that you've given it. So in this case, between 0 and 100, or whatever makes sense for that particular code. An on event takes many different event types like mouse over and click, which we talked about in a different level, depending on the situation that makes sense. So think about your experiences today and in the previous lesson. How is a programming language different from a natural language? So hopefully you realize that programming languages are much more precise. They have very strict rules, and they may feel a bit awkward at first, but you'll get used to it. Here are some definitions that you need to know. A program statement, also known as a command or a line of code, that is just something that's happening with the program. And a program is the collection of program statements. All of the lines of code together is the program. Two different ways to run a program: sequential programming, that is such as this example right here, where every line of code is going to run in sequence when you hit run. And event-driven programming is where some program statements run only when triggered by an event, such as this. When you click the big button, that program runs. Otherwise, nothing inside that event happens. We're going to keep practicing using these terms and practicing programming. So start thinking about how you might want to use what you've learned today in your project.